This is Dr. Al-Assad. I'm a postdoc fellow at the University of Arkansas. And today I'm gonna run this together. Today we have a very honored guest, Dr. Al-Khateeb. He's a very friend of mine, and I really appreciate his effort and his work and his participation for today's presentation. So usually we will go through the room, and I will allow everyone to a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, their research, and what they are working on, where they are from, and what university. So I will start with Da Vinci. You want to go ahead? Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, that's me. Da Vinci is the conference room that I'm utilizing at the office. My name is Chris Daly. I assist with the logistics and helping to coordinate these meetings. So if you have a topic that you're interested in sharing, please feel free to reach out to me. We're always looking for folks to present. As you all know, we have these meetings once a month. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you or someone you know would be interested in presenting a topic along the lines of social cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Haydar.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Haydar Al-Rubai, and I'm a PhD student here at Cosmos. My research is about narrative analysis to detect, misbehaviors. And thank you, Samar, for joining this. Samar was one of the main students who joined Cosmos. So good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Haydar. Stephen.
Hello there. My name is hello there. My name is Stephen Dick. I have a long-standing interest in social collective action research. However, right now I'm working for RMC research. We do primarily education and education evaluation projects.
Thank you, Stephen. Next, I have Moinuddin Sheikh.
Hello, everyone. My name is Moinuddin Sheikh. I'm a PhD student in information science, and I also work in Cosmos. My current research is in role of multimedia in online mobilization and connective action. I apply sociology and psychology theories to quantify the role of multimedia. And I also work in many other projects in Cosmos from time to time when needed. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheikh. I have Manohar next.
Hey, hi everyone. So I'm a master's in computer science student at ULR. So I'm also a graduate research assistant at Cosmos. So mainly I work on data pipeline platform at Cosmos. So our goal is to facilitate everyone in the Cosmos for the easier data access. So we build an ETL pipeline with Python microservices on Kubernetes platform. Yeah, that's mostly what I do at Cosmos. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Manohar. I have Miorina next.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Marina Gurung, a fellow cosmographer, and right now I'm working on narrative analysis. Looking forward for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mert.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mert Can. I'm a PhD student in information science at ULR. I'm also a graduate research assistant at Cosmos. My main project is recommender bias on YouTube, and I am also working on color theory in video characterization project, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Niloufar. Next.
Hello, my name is Niloufar, and I'm PhD student, and I'm also a researcher at Cosmos, and I'm working on toxicity in social media.
Thank you. And I think last we have Tim.
Yes, good morning. This is Tim Zimmerman. I'm a PhD student in the information quality program. I recently started working with Dr. Agarwal's team on the algorithmic bias program for social media. So I'm very interested in the talk this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I skipped Dr. Al-Khateeb bio. So I'm gonna present Dr. Al-Khateeb, and he's an assistant professor at Department of Computer Science in Nebraska. He's he was a lifesaver for me in this research. So he's an old friend of mine. He's been studying this research for a while, more than 9 years, and he's focused on deviant acts and on social media and identifying deviant groups. So, which the main influence, the groups that causing main influence in the on the individual's behavior and provoke hysteria among citizens. And also he studied a lot of types of deviant actors, where they are human or automated actors, by leveraging social science theories, computer simulations, content analysis, and lots of social cyber forensics. He published more than 50 books, chapters, journals, and participated in many conferences, and his research has conducted and was presented at various conferences, schools, and with U.S. Department of Defense agencies. He won lots of awards for doing this type of research, such as the Best Paper Awards, Excellence in Research Awards, Most Innovative Award, and many other awards that he deserved, and he deserved more. So I'm gonna pass the room for him, and go ahead, please.
All right, thank you everyone for being here this morning. And thank you, Mustafa, for the introduction. I hope you guys will find this presentation helpful and worth your time. Today, I'll be talking about building a computational model of mobs. And the idea here is, how can we leverage social science theories, and we'll look at these to build a comprehensive model that can basically explain how mobbers join, for example, a mob, what motivates them to join a mob. And then also, hopefully, we'll be able to predict the outcome of this organized events in a way that can help us maybe mitigate the risk that can be posed by these type of events and so on. And the plan is to do all this using a computer simulation. So I'll start first by talking about what I mean by mob, and then provide some examples. They have a lot of examples, so I might just go through them fast, because I see the time is a little bit, I think we have less than 45 minutes. So the examples part, I might go through them fast, but then I'll also talk about the various types of mobbers. And then I'll talk about how we started studying mobs back in 2014. We're working on this, me and Dr. Agrawal. And then what is the plan, or what are we planning to do for the next maybe 3 or 4 years from now? How are we planning to study mobs? What kind of approaches we're trying to follow, and so on. All right. So what we mean by mob, a mob is an organized event. It's basically an event where we get a lot of people get together. They do something, and they usually have agenda. The idea of agenda is very important here, because that's what distinguishes mobs from the word crowd. The crowd is where we have people gathering at a specific location, but they don't specifically have an agenda. Now, when we have an agenda, which could be different type of agenda, could be political, could be for entertainment, could be for religious, or other basically, or social cause. These are all different type of agenda that could be exhibited by the groups. Then we have a mob. Now, when mobs actually happen, it's usually organized through social media. And the process for organizing this event has different phases. So we have a planning phase where we have the mobbers try to figure out what to do, when to do this event, where, how, and who should we basically involve in that. And then we have the recruitment phase where mobbers use online, usually media, to try to find people of interest, people who might be interested in this type of event. If it's an event for example, let's say protesting against a specific, let's say, cause and like political reason or any kind of reason, then they could be people who are interested in these type of events. Or if it is an event, for example, for a biking group, there may be people who share their interest on, let's say, Facebook, who are interested in, let's say, joining a biking group, and those people are basically people of interest. So these kind of recruitment happens, and we've seen these type of recruitment happens on different events, especially with ISIS recruitments and so on. And then that's basically where the messages are basically sent out to these individuals, try to recruit them. Then the execution phase where the mob actually get carried on, and then that could be happened in the physical space, could be in the cyberspace, or it could be both. And we'll see example of all these today also. Then there is the replaying and republishing phase, and that's where there are products of the mob. So after the fact that the mob happened, what kind of images or videos were captured, what type of things happened, and these are all shared on social media. And then finally, the evaluation phase where the recruiters of, or basically the organizers of these events, they try to evaluate their work and they say, well, this mob succeeded or not. And if not, what are the lessons learned, so that they can use that later on to make basically better mobs or more successful mobs if that first one didn't basically succeeded. All right. Now, when we have mobs, so the next logical question is, so are all these mobs the same? And the answer is not really. So we reviewed the literature and we found there are different types of mobs, and these could be categorized, all right, based on some non-exclusive characteristics. So mobs could be classified based on the environment. So are these events happening in the cyberspace? Are they happening in the physical space? Or are they happening both? Basically spaces. We also can categorize it based on the type, right? So do we have just humans? Do we have bots in the mob? Do we have both? Do we have humans and bots? And most of these events, we do have both. That's why I'll show you guys also on the next slides. We also studied bots, right? Then also we talk about the length. The length of the mob is something also interesting. And one of these characteristics, whether this mob is basically short and what we call it flash, which could happen within, I would say, 20 to 25 minutes, or is it a long mob, which could last for days or months and so on. And then also what kind of motive these mobs could have. So is these mobs just for entertainment? Are they trying to have some kind of political statement? Are they trying to have some social statement, a religious statement, So any kind of agenda or any kind of motive that would basically encourage these individuals to get together and do something as they have been asked to, then that would be an example of a motivation. So these are all non-exclusive characteristics. So meaning a mob could be, for example, a cyber mob, and then a flash mob, and then for entertainment. And we'll see also examples of these. Now, mobs are not dead yet. So if we look at these Google Trends graphs, we can see that the mob phenomenon is still of interest. Figures on the left side shows you the interest of this word across worldwide, versus the right side, you'll see the interest in the USA. There are a couple of peaks in 2010 and 2015, but also in the last 3 years, which will basically be the two bottom figures, shows you the trend of how people are basically Googling these type of words or this keyword, which is mob. So you'll see some peaks on January of 2021, October of 2021, and so on, and also even October 2022. All right. So next, I'll show you some of the examples, how mobs could happen in, as I mentioned, in physical space, cyberspace, or both. I'll also show you some examples of mobs that happens not only in the USA, so it could also be an international or cross borders or different places of the world. And then also we can see good mobs. So not all mobs are bad. We have some good mobs. So I'll also show examples of these. So here's an example or 3 examples that show you some of these entertainment flash mobs where we have people in 2010. A lot of people gathered, for example, in Seattle carrying umbrellas because they were tired of Seattle's rain. All right. Other ones is basically happened in Japan in 2016, where people gathered in one of these mobs, in these malls, and then they tried to play the Beethoven Symphony. And that's basically one of their way of celebrating what is called as the Awa culture. And then there's also mobs where we have political and cybernetic flash mobs. So this is a mob where we have people gathered in Thailand in 2019, and they basically tried to protest against one of the former military rulers that trying to basically, his party was banned from basically going for the election. So people were trying to protest that. As I mentioned, not all mobs are bad. There are examples of mobs that are helpful. This is a silly and entertaining mob where we have people gathered, for example, here in Nebraska in one of the fields where they basically, there's a lot of people named Josh Swain. And this guy, he started a Facebook page where he invited everyone, his name was Josh Swain on Facebook. And the idea here is to gather to do some kind of like stare kind of a fight, and then whoever wins will basically will get the right to claim his name. And then the idea here is basically people as they go to these events, they donate, and then the donation is for the children hospital in Nebraska, and they raise around $8,000 in basically donation. So this is one of these examples where we have a good mob. And this is what we call it entertainment cybernetic flash mob, because also the whole thing lasted less than half an hour. And was coordinated on social media, but then it actually get carried on in the physical field, like in a field with the geo coordinates in Nebraska, and that's why it's called cybernetic. Here is an example, a little bit recent in 2022, where activists basically raided the Burger King, in one of the Burger Kings in Paris, and then they have an agenda in this case, basically to raise a statement about the cruelty of the industry breeding the chickens, which are used in these fast food restaurants. So they all dressed up as these with these masks, and then basically showed up in one of these Burger Kings just to attract basically the attention of the media and make a statement. So this is a physical flash mob. Here is a cyber mob where people get together online and they just start creating using some kind of text editor called shader toy editor, and then they try to create some kind of visualizations and 3D models by basically having this community of people telling the person who's typing what to basically type, so that and execute to see that shape or that kind of objects that they're trying to create. Here's an example of another cyber mob where we have the GameStop stock market, and this is what we call as a flash mob investing. A lot of people purchased and then basically the stocks, and then they raised it from $20 to 400 something in less than a month. So this is an example of a cyber flash mobs. All right. And we have also a group of hackers. They hacked YouTube channels. These were basically for YouTube influencers. They were basically from the car community. And then they lured people to log into fake, basically websites that look like their YouTube login. And then they steal their credentials. They hack these channels, change their content, started distributing the videos, So this is also an example of deviant, but in this case, cyber flash mobs, because it happens fast, but all in the cyberspace, nothing in the physical space. And the most probably famous example here is basically the January 21 attack on the US Capitol. And this is an example of a cybernetic long deviant mob, because this lasted for more than 30 minutes around. It actually was, I think, 1 or 2 days or so. And then people also were injured. Some people died, a lot of property damages and things like that. So that's an example of cybernetic long and deviant mob. More of deviant mobs. We have this brazen flash mob that happens in Walnut Creek, where a group of people stormed basically these stores, and they try to steal these merchandise. And this is an example of a deviant cybernetic flash mob, because it was also organized via social media. And then here, even 7-Eleven got basically raided or basically attacked by a group of people in Los Angeles, where actual people broke in, they steal things, and then they run out. So that's also an example of a deviant physical and flash mob. So all these examples lead us to think, are these mobs carried out only by human? And the idea here is not really. Sometimes these are basically carried out with the help of social bots, especially in the republishing and replaying phase and the recruitment phase. So we have a lot of bots that could basically disseminate messages on social media trying to recruit people for these events, or basically display what was produced during these mobs. Any image, any video that was captured during the event, then they can basically retweet it or reshare it or republish it and so on. So we've done a lot of studies on social bots. So we looked at the social bots that happened in the Crimean invasion back in 2014. And then that was an example of social bots that were very simple. You can capture them just by looking at the friends and followers, and they follow this I follow you, you follow me kind of principle, where if you find one bot and then just look at their friends, you can see them all form what is known as a clique network. Clique network is basically when we have everyone is connected to everyone. And that basically was one of these very naive bots. But then as time passes, we see the complexity in the behavior and the coordination basically increased. So in 2015, during the two military exercises that was carried on between the US forces and NATO forces in Europe, Trident Juncture, as well as the Dragoon Ride, we've seen more advanced bots where we have basically coordination happen in the information network, where we looked at who shared what, and then you can see a lot of people share, for example, the same URL or share the same text, exact text, and so on. So that's basically one of these. And then if you look at their friends network, they are not connected. Then in ISIS in 2016, we saw even more advanced techniques, where we have type of bots that are called generators and peripherals, where we have accounts that generate a lot of messages or tweets, and then there are accounts that only retweet these messages. So there is some kind of hierarchy in the kind of organizational structure. So, and again, all these are basically published individually, as well as the comparative analysis of these is also published in the Defense Strategic Communication Journal. So if anyone is interested, you're very welcome to read these papers. So this is an example of, if we look at all these events, we can also say, well, all these events are an example of a cybernetic, because it happens usually in the physical as well as the cyberspace. They are long because they last for a long period of time. It could be weeks. And then also happened with automated actors participation, whether sharing, recruiting, And then a recent study we've conducted on the use of social bots during the cyber flash mobs and collected data from social media and saw how tweets are basically how bots try to tweet in a way that they can go beyond the radar so they don't get captured. So for example, social bots, they tend to share their location and language less than humans. They also tend to post fewer toxic tweets than human, so they don't get captured. And then among other findings. And again, this is also published at SBP 2021. So if anyone is interested, you can go ahead and read that paper. So so mobs are basically, after talking about their types, their examples, the type of mobbers, it's time to talk about how we actually study these these mobs in the past, where we probably focused more on individual events. So we looked at one event at a time, tried to understand it, tried to find some theory that can basically explain the behavior of these mobbers. And one of these theories that we've looked at is the theory of collective action. And I see a lot of folks here are interested in that theory, and they started to look at it, and maybe some of you guys are also doing research on it. So I hope this will be more connected to your work. And then after that, of course, I'll talk about the new way that I'm proposing and I'm working on currently with also Dr. Nitin and other folks here at Creighton University. So collective action, the idea of collective action is two or more people get together, do something for a shared interest, all right? This theory was studied back in the 1965, I believe. And one of the earliest books that you guys see here is basically talked about the logic of collective action, where we have a lot of mathematical, the idea here is to try to look at these concepts and build some kind of mathematical formulations of the theory. All right, how can we have factors related and connected in a way that will help us in concluding something new? All right, so we've looked at this theory in 2014, and then we looked at four basically factors. And these factors are interest, control, power, importance of the event, and the utility. And then the connection between them were all driven in a way that will lead to some type of threshold. And then if that threshold value is reached, then we can say, well, this person is actually going to participate, or maybe not, based only on these factors. So the idea of utility is the benefits that you gain. So if you gain benefits from participating in an event, you're most likely going to participate in it, right? Of course, the idea of risk also comes in handy in here. So less risk means more participation. When we talk about interest, if you're interested in a specific type of activity or in a specific party or specific political idea or religion or any kind of these different type of things that could basically interest the person, then you're most likely going to participate in an event that fell under that category or under that interest. All right. So if you're a biker and there is an event in town inviting you to bike, then you're most likely going to participate versus someone who have no interest in biking. Same thing happened with control. So if you know your participation matter, if you know by going to this event, you will make a difference, you will encourage people, for example, to participate, then you have an example, you'll have actually a control on the outcome of the event, because your participation will make a difference, will encourage people to join this mob or this event. So then you're most likely going to actually participate. And of course, if you are a powerful person, and that power could be measured using different ways, in a social network environment, if you have a lot of, for example, followers, then you could be considered as a powerful person, because if you make a statement, then your statement will be reached to more people than someone who have fewer followers, right? So how are these basically factors are connected? Again, this was published in multiple publications in different ways to be utilized through different examples. So we've utilized this on ISIS network where we looked at recruitments, recruiters, sorry, and then we looked at the recruitment of ISIS, and then we were able to find new recruiters basically by calculating these interest, control, as well as power. On black hat hackers, we also were able to utilize this event and then try to find it. For example, what kind of techniques they're using, like hashtag latching, to, for example, advertise for a hacking event that they're trying to conduct. All right. So this was the framework. As I mentioned, it was utilized on different events, but also it is based on one theory. All right. So keep that in mind because we will revisit this later on in our talk today. The next thing we've noticed is when mobs are actually conducted, they are not on one platform. They are on multiple platforms. Usually these recruiters and mob organizers try to leverage as many social media sites as possible so that their message can reach to more people. They also give that impression of their event is really big because, oh, I see it on Twitter. Oh, I see it on YouTube. I see it on Facebook. Oh, this event is really big because it's attracting a lot of people, right? So the idea here is to use, how can we find these connections? How can we tell people who are organizing this event on one platform are actually the same people who are organizing that event on another platform? How can we link these individuals across platforms? And then the idea here is to use something called social cyber forensics. And we've written a book about this, me and Dr. Nitin. And the idea here is we use different techniques in a tool called Maltego and steps. And then basically, if we follow these steps, we can link these individuals, we can link these different entities. And these entities could be blog sites, could be YouTube channels, could be, for example, Twitter handles. And these are not connected usually with like a direct connections. So there might these entities like a Twitter account as well as a blog site. They might not be connected directly, but they could be connected implicitly. So the idea here is to focus on these implicit connections, not on the explicit connections. So an example of this, if we have a Twitter account that have a blog site on their description, this is an example of an explicit connection because this person is saying this is my blog, right? So if you want to read more about what I'm talking about, just visit my blog and here's my blog, read more about it, right? So that's an example of an explicit connection. But the idea here is we're trying to get implicit connection. So when we have this account, which is on Twitter, in sharing a lot of, for example, blog posts, and then we look at this blog post, or all these blog posts are shared by this set of blogs, and all these blogs are tracked by, for example, the same Google Analytic ID. And then this Google Analytic ID is registered with this email, and then this email is the same email as this Twitter handle. Then these are implicit connections, right? They are not visible to the naked eye. If you just go and look at their Twitter handle, you won't be able to see these type of connections. But you'll have to go through this methodology and use these tools and open source information to try to link all these entities. And that's how we have implicit connections. And that's what the social cyber forensics is. So that's also some of the work that we've looked at to have a better understanding of the mob phenomenon. Because as you've seen so far, the mobs could be organized on multiple platforms. They could be carried on by humans as well as non-humans or with the help of non-humans. How can we find these? How can we distinguish them? And then the last layer here is where we have actually the implicit connections between these different platforms. All right. So next, what we are proposing, right? So what we are proposing so far, based on the work that we've worked on so far, we're proposing a new one of studying mobs. And the idea here is we can use computer simulation. All right, so we want to start with the theoretical framework that I just showed you guys, the collective action theoretical framework, and then try to simulate an event. All right, and then this event, as we simulate it, we try to see what kind of output we can get out of that simulated model or that simulated mob, and then compare it to like ground truth data. So there are multiple stems to this basically kind of endeavor that we're working on. One is looking at the social science theories, try to understand which one are related to the mob in addition to the collective action theory. And then once we find that, what kind of factors that are basically related to the coordination of the mob, then how can we simulate a mob using these factors? And then the last one is to come up with a ground truth data of real mobs so that we can actually compare our simulated model to the actual mob. So if we see there are a lot of mobs that have this number of participants, they always succeed if they happen in this location, can we simulate that? All right. And what is the agreement between the simulated model and then the ground truth data? And of course, our goal is to raise that basically, I would say, accuracy to the best possible, so that given some initial thought about the mob, right? If we know there's a mob that is happening tomorrow at Arkansas with this number of people invited, and we know this number of organizers, and then we run the simulation, what does the simulation model tell us? Is it going to be successful or not? Right. So that's the end kind of goal of this next phase of this research. So I'll talk about the different bits and parts and how we are addressing this so far. So we were recently awarded a 3-year grant from the US Air Force Research Lab, as well as the Office of Naval Research, to study and come up with a simulated model of the mobs. As I mentioned, we will be working on data collection, building a theoretical framework, collecting, and then also, of course, building the simulation model, and then testing, and then looking at different social science theories, extract these factors that will help us in building the theoretical model. And that hopefully will lead to a good, I would say, computer simulation model of the mob. All right, and that will be theoretically sound. And then, of course, we will test it on ground truth data. All right, so that's the project that we are working on, and then we'll be working on for the next 3 years. So we started working on this by looking at something called the Monte Carlo method. In a Monte Carlo method, simply explained, is basically assigning random values to a set of factors and simulate the mod, or run the simulation for multiple times, so that we can hopefully get a result of something that we're trying to study. All right, so we started by using the Monte Carlo method to randomly assign values to the factors we identified from the theory of collective action. All right, and then once we assign these values to the factors, then we can run some scenarios based on these factors. All right, and then we can see what happened to the mob, or to the simulated mob. Is it going to be successful or not? All right. So again, this is also published recently in MSBC 2022 conference. So if anyone is interested, I think I already shared the paper with some folks here, but I can also share it with anyone who is interested. So the idea here, as I mentioned, we looked at these factors, we extracted the utility, interest, control, power, importance of the event, So what are the scenarios? Scenarios based on these factors, you can say, well, if we have an interest and control, then the mobile will act. If we have interest but no control, the mobile will either act or withdraw with a 50-50 chance. So it's like a coin flip. And then doesn't have interest, doesn't have, and have a control, then they will either withdraw or power exchange. And then power exchange meaning they are basically willing to give up on participation for a specific event. In return, they will gain some kind of social capital, and then social capital is something that is also studied in the social science theories, where we say, well, it's basically you're getting something in return, all right, socially, which basically could be membership in a family or an ethnic association, elite club, And then also a mob, if they don't have interest and they don't have control, then they also have a 50-50 chance of either withdrawing or acting against the mob. All right, so now we know these scenarios. We run a simulation method, simulated model, which I'll show you next slides. But before we get there, we also want to talk about the power of all mobbers, which basically will tell us the importance of the event. So if we have an event where we have a lot of powerful people participating in it, then this is a very important event, and this will encourage participation. All right. And then what we said is basically we hypothesized that if this importance of the event reached a specific threshold value, and this threshold value could be estimated from historical data, which I'll also show you later today, then we can probably say, well, this mob is going to be successful or not. All right. So the idea here is to look at participation rate. So what is the maximum number, or what is the highest possible participation we can get, all right, if we have a mob with this type of characteristics, meaning with this number of people participating, this number of people withdrawing or acting against, or right? So what is the maximum participation rate? So we did run some simulation. We tried to answer questions like, what is the chance of a mob that will be successful given a specific set of parameters, like number of invited people, say we have the threshold value of the mob, the number of simulations, the number of powerful actors, and then also how many powerful actors we need in general if we have a mob of these type of characteristics and we want it to be successful. All right, so I have 1,000 people. How many person I need to, for example, organize an event that will be successful with a high chance? Then I can say, well, let me run the simulation, and then that should tell me how many people I need as a powerful organizers of these basically event. Sorry. And then the last one is basically, how does this time it takes for the mob participants, or the people who we invite? Like if I give you more time, let's say I invite you for a mob, I give you more time to think, will this lead to making you decide to join the mob, or will this lead to make you decide not to join the mob, right? So that's basically the third question. So we run this experiments to answer these questions. I'm not going to go through the details of this because they're also looking at the time, but again, the publication is there, and I would be very happy to discuss any of these with any one of you guys. But just in a nutshell, we have the model input parameters, total number of invited people, threshold number of simulation, and then there is a bunch of output we get. And then each one of these gave us some, we run an experiment. This is the setup for the experiment, and each experiment have a goal. So here, for example, experiment 1 have a goal of estimating the average participation rate. All right, so what is the maximum number of people that we can get to participate if we have an event with these characteristics? All right. So we've looked at this. We found like mob success rate depend inversely on the threshold value, which is kind of expected, because if we have a higher participation rate, then it means most likely the event will be successful. Lower participation rate means failed mobs. And then also the acting mobbers affect the mob participation positively, which is also makes sense. But then the act against withdrawn power exchange, they affect this participation negatively. And then, of course, the act against is the one who affected the largest amount. Of course, if we have an event that are supporting a specific cause, and then there is an event or other people who are coming to that same event with the opposite ideology, then that means there is more risk. So then your decision to participate will probably be less, right? Because you know there is a risk by participating. All right, so that's also what's shown in the simulation. We run another experiment here, and the idea here, we're trying to find the number of powerful actors. And again, we find that for a given mob with a specific number of invited people, how many organizers do we need to make a mob successful? That was also run. And then we also find that, for example, using this formula, the bigger the crowd, basically, the more organizers we need. All right, and then we also looked at average number of needed powerful actors, and then also what happens if we have more people. Is that increase, for example, the chance of participating or not, and so on. So basically the effect of the crowd. And then finally, we looked at a way of finding if people are given more time, will they basically, for example, participate in a mob or not? And that shows, we find that when people are given more time to think about what to do, the over participation rate goes up. So basically, if you're given more time, then you're most likely going to participate in the simulation model. However, we find the opposite of this actually in the data, which I'll show you soon. All right, so that's basically more digging need to be done in this case. Then, since we know that the mob happen in an environment where there are people get together in that environment and they do something, then the next, and then we've used the Monte Carlo method to assign randomly interest and control to these agents, what we call them. Then this leads us to another modeling approach. It's called agent-based modeling approach. And the idea here is we have an agent in an environment. What are basically the factors that are related to the agent? What are the factors that are related to the environment? And how that actually affect the overall participation of this mobber. So now we basically took the simulation a little bit into like more advanced, one more advanced steps, right? Which basically we counter also for the existence of environment. And then now we can talk about factors related to the environment, not only to the agent, and factors related to the event itself, not only to the agent, right? So with agent-based modeling approach, that basically allow us to add these type of factors, which you guys haven't seen yet because we haven't talked about it, but I will show you soon. So we use also agent-based modeling. The tool that we use is called NetLogo, and this is one of the most used tool for agent-based modeling. And then also there is a set of questions that we were trying to find an answer for in here. We also run a set of experiments, and then we followed the methodology that was recommended by Clark McPhail et al. Back in 1992. And the idea here is basically you can get different forms of collective actions that vary in complexity based on the characteristics of the agents or based on the characteristics of the mobbers or of the people who are participating in that collective action. So independently is one of these methods where we assume that the people who will decide to join the mob have no communication between them. So they don't communicate. You're getting an invitation to participate in a mob. Based on that, you will just decide without asking others, oh, are you going? Let me see who is going. Maybe I will join. All right. And then the second type of collective action is basically we have interdependently, which means agents communicate with other agents to figure out what to do. So maybe if you're going, I will go too. Right? So you're calling your friends. So there is some kind of communication that happened. And then the other one is basically, or the other form of collective action basically could be voluntarily or obediently, meaning you will participate just because your boss is going, all right? Or just because whoever is higher in you in terms of that event hierarchy let's say the organizers of the events are going, and you happen to know those organizers, they are a brother, your sister, your bosses, they are going, then you will go just because they are going. So you kind of obediently or voluntarily going to participate. All right. So we did conduct experiments that try to simulate this type of collective actions, or all of these type of collective actions under the umbrella of agent-based modeling. All right. So we've looked at this experiment, and then we try to find, does the number of invited people to a mob affect the number of agents participating? And then that will affect the success of the mob. So we also run an experiment, and then we have some findings which are basically reported here. And for example, we have number of invited people doesn't affect the rate of participation. So if you have a lot of people versus low people, that doesn't matter. You don't get higher participation rate. All right. And then we run another experiment, which basically simulated the second form, or sorry, the third form of collective action here is basically the voluntarily, obediently. And then we consider the effect of the environment. We use the property of the environment in this case. And we said, we assign these agents randomly to this environment, and their locations is randomly assigned. But if we have an agent that happened to be close to a powerful agent, which again, we choose who get to be a powerful agent or not, and then within 1.5 patch is like the distance between these two, then we consider this person is actually sticking with his boss or her boss. So basically we're saying they're going to do whatever that powerful agent is doing. And then since these organizers are actually by default going to participate, then these agents will also be participating. So we added another layer or another set of mobbers that will act by default just because they are following the orders of their bosses, let's say. All right. And then we saw how that affected the participation rate. And then what is the effect of that type of behavior on the success and failure of the mobs. All right, so I know we have 4 more minutes. So I want to get to this very quickly. And then again, I'll leave some maybe time for questions and answers. But the idea here is, in conclusion, we did simulate a lot of mobs. There are some limitations to our work. The idea here is we cannot generalize this to real world mobs yet, just because we have not tested this model with the ground truth data. But we are working on this. The other one is we currently collecting data from social media site, which I'll show you soon, that will help in validating the model. And then also this model is based on one theory. So we want to look at other theories. All right, so some steps that I'll talk about briefly that we are taking to address these limitations is now we're trying to build, instead of framework, we call it a network of theoretical network of theories that help us in modeling mobs. So if you look here, each red dot is actually one of the theories we looked at, all right? And then from each theory, we extracted these factors, and then these factors are either related to the event or related to the agent or to the mobber itself. All right, an example of a factor that is related to an agent will be an interest, you're interested or not, versus an event factor is, where is this event going to happen? Is it in Arkansas because I live there, easy for me to go to it, or is it in some other part of the world, which it's hard for me to participate in? All right. So we looked at these theories, we extracted these factors, and then we also looked at these. There are sometimes we have factors that are actually being studied or mentioned by multiple theories. That's why we have these common connections, that power and utility and interest are actually mentioned or were studied by the collective action theory, as well as the diffusion of innovation theory. All right. So using this kind of multi-theoretical kind of framework or network, if you want to call it, we try to take this model, which was based on the collective action theory, one step further, right? And then see how that affects the participation rate, the success and failure of a mob. And then of course, all these need to be validated. So we collected data from something called Meetup, and it's a social network site where people can actually create groups, and then they create events and they invite people to join these events. And then of course, we get a lot of data about who participated, who didn't participate, what is the response time, how long did it take them to say yes or no to join that mob or something. And then also the topic of the mob and some other metrics spheres, just very quick overview of the data sets that we have. And then we're planning to use this data to actually validate the multi-theoretical model to see what is the accuracy of our model in compared to the ground truth data. All right, so here there's also some assumptions. We try to find how can we calculate these factors, right? So we have factors, these are theoretical factors, they are very general. How can we make them specific to the data sets we have? Like, how can I talk about the number of people who withdraw from the mob? Well, we have a column in this data sets called the no count, right? So we kind of now in the process of making these links of saying, this factor can be estimated using this formula or this attribute. Once we map all these, then we can basically come up with some kind of calculations. So here is an example of one of these calculations. So we look at the participation rate for cyber and physical mobs. You can see, for example, physical mobs have a lower participation rate than cyber mobs. So people feel more comfortable joining a mob if it was online than if it is actually requiring them to go to a physical place and participate. So these type of conclusions and kind of mappings and coming from these data will help us later on in validating the model. We've also looked at the time it takes to advertise, because if you guys remember in the early slides, I talked about the mob, basically mob process, right? Organization process, and one of them was the advertising phase. So you can also look at this by just looking at how many days do the people usually advertise for a mob, and then based on these different type of categories. For example, if something require people to take, for example, some kind of lessons or some training, then the people usually advertise for it very long in advance before that event actually happen, right? Because that will require them to train, versus things that doesn't require that much of training or any kind of special kind of, let's say if it was a dance, maybe they need to train them on how to dance that specific dance, right? So that will take more time, versus others that are very simple, like just eating, drinking, dating, all these different type of events, mob events, then they take less advertising time. For example, here we've looked at, and I said, this is something different than what we find in the model, and we will need to dig a little bit more. In the model, we found out that if you're given more time, then you will probably gonna say yes, but in the data we've seen is the opposite actually. So if you're giving more time to decide what to do, then this will most likely result. So if you're taking a lot of time to decide to go to mob, you're most likely going to say, no, I'm not going. But if you have, like if you basically you're giving less time, then you're most likely going to say yes. So the yes number of people who said yes, their average time was shorter than actually the average time for people who said actually no. All right, so I think I am 3 minutes beyond the time that I was allowed to present. I would like to thank all the agencies that supported this work through the years, and of course the recent ones by the Office under the Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And this is the award number, and also all these findings are ours. It doesn't reflect the funding agency's opinion, but we appreciate all the funding and general support throughout the years. And thank you for listening this morning. If you have any question, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Khateeb. Chris, how much time do we have?
Yeah, so technically we end at 12, but if folks would like to stay on the call, if you don't have a hard cutoff time, you're welcome to stay on and ask questions. If Dr. Samir, if that's okay with you.
Yes, absolutely. If there's any question, I'll be happy to answer.
Yes.
Dr. Samer, I will
Yes,
go
sure.
first. It was a wonderful talk. There are a lot of theories, social science theories that you use that directly goes in my work as well, which is a complementary and also helpful in my work.
Awesome.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much for your paper that you sent to me on request. Wonderful. So I've got like a couple of questions that I wanted to ask. The very first question would be, so you mentioned about your model, which is a Monte Carlo model, right? And
Yes.
so I want to know, I'm very curious to know actually, on an average, how many simulations it will run for a given mob. So that's one question. And the second question will be, in your work of prediction, do you use logistic regression as well in somewhere? So these are the two questions that I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sheikh. This is a really great question. So to answer your first question, any number of times, right? If you have a giant machine, have a lot of computational resources, we can run it as much as we want. All right. Now, for the exact specifics of the experiment, I can go to the slides and then I will find out that for you. But it's also written in the paper for how many of these simulations we run. We're talking about the Monte Carlo, right? So yeah. I believe, okay, number of simulation. I think it was 10,000 simulation. So 10,000 mob, and then the average of these.
Wonderful, thank you.
And then for the second one, for the logistic regression, we have not done validation yet or predictions in terms of comparing the result to the, so our prediction in this case is more of like on average, right? So we have not, to answer your question, we have not used logistic regression yet, all right? Is it something that we will consider in the future? Maybe, maybe not. Because right now, as I mentioned, the simulation model give us some output, right? So it give us the average of these 10,000 simulations that we run, or on average, these 10,000 mobs, 50% of them succeeded versus, let's say, the other 50 didn't succeed, or 30% of them succeeded versus the other one. So just like a rough number, if that makes sense. But then when we get to the prediction part, right? We're trying to predict. We are not doing machine learning, if that makes sense. Yeah. We are doing more of like averages of these runs of these simulations, all right? But then to tune the parameters is where we use the data, right? So we look at the data from Meetup, and then we try to simulate these mobs that we know that are successful or failed. And then based on that, if we see, let's say, I have 100 succeeded, 100 non-succeeded, right? I run my model and I find just 70% succeeded and then 70 failed, right? Then I can calculate the accuracy and say, well, my model is not really that good because it was able to just map 70% versus 100%, right? So these type of analysis will be done. So to answer the question, no, we are not using logistic regression yet. Maybe we'll consider it in the future for sure.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for answering.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Summer. I have two questions very quick. So the first question was related to the timing when at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned we have a short-term mob versus long-term mob.
Yes.
So how do you consider this into your model to how and the timing? And let's say you have a long mob that is going on. That's the first question. The second question, how do you select your threshold for a succeeded mob versus not succeeded mob? So
yes.
Right.
Is that all, Mustafa, or is there more?
Yeah, those two questions.
Yes. So great questions. Yes. The answer your question about the time. Okay. Mobs have different categories, and the 20 to 25 threshold value that I give in terms of the time, this was from the events that have been studied in the literature, and we reviewed the publications about them. And then we find out that most of the mobs that were called as flash mobs, they usually lasted for 25 minutes and below, and anything more than that lasted for more than 25. And that's where they call them long mob. Now, how are we going to use this in our simulation? When we do a simulation, we can do something called ticks, right? So how many times we update the model, all right? And then we are trying to come up with an equation that can basically quantify this. So this will be utilized. One way of utilizing it, which we started to work on, is to consider the time it takes for the mobbers to decide whether they join a mob or not. All right. So let's say I have 1,000 agent, okay, and I want to simulate a mob. All right, and I know this 1,000 people, they are not going to decide at the same minute they receive the invitation whether they're going to join the mob or not. Right. So they will take time. Now, how is that, how much time they will take, right? So that how much is going to come from the study of the mobs that we have currently, right? So we can come up with some kind of equation, and we can see, let's say, majority of the people, let's say 80% of the people decide within the first 10 minutes. So I can run the model in a way like the first 10 ticks, 80% of that 1,000 people should basically decide whether they are joining the mob or not, right? Then the other maybe time left is for the other 20% left from the agents who did not decide, right? So that's one way that we can utilize that time. Did that answer your question? First question.
Yes.
Okay, so now go back to the other one, right? So how do we estimate the threshold value? That's something we're working on from the data. I can show you one of the slides, which I mentioned at the end. Okay. So this is something we're currently working on. And then I can share with you this one probably. Do you see my screen? Do you see my slides? Awesome. So if you look here, we just looked very briefly on the mobs that are physical versus cyber mobs, okay? Because these are the two categories we have and the data we have. So we split those events, and we said, well, the withdraw is actually the no count, which is an attribute we have in the data sets. The act is actually the yes count. The number of invited people can be estimated using these columns in the data. And then we can calculate the participation rate, all right? So for each event, how many people participated? Historically speaking, we take the average, that would be the threshold. So what we can do, what we've seen here is basically for number of physical mobs that we were able to run this formula on were 401, okay? And we find the average participation rate was about 0.22, so 22%. These events have 0.22% participation rate, right, on average. And then the number of cyber mobs were 24 of them, 0.339, so let's say 0.4. That's the threshold value for the cyber as well as the physical. Now, for the successful or non-successful mob, we don't have a way yet to determine whether this event is successful or not, right? And that's something I'm working on currently with a graduate student at Cosmos. His name is, what was his name? Sheikh
Samuel.
Yes, thank you, Sheikh. So we're working with Samuel to look at this data and try to come up with which event is successful, which event were not successful, maybe using some machine learning technique. And then once we have that label created, we can run the same formula now, just like we did for the physical and cyber mob. We can see what is the threshold value per category. Per physical mob, successful, what is their threshold value? Cyber mob failed, right? What is their failed value, failed threshold value, right? So these type of values could be estimated. And of course, once we estimate them, we can basically continue with the simulation. So that's why it's like we work in simulation, but there is a detour, and that detour is basically where we have to do machine learning to be able to classify actually these events, because we have events, we know these characteristics about it, but the most important characteristics to our research is whether this event actually is successful or not, and that's something is missing in the data. So we're figuring out how we can fill in that gap. And then once we do, then we can go back to our main road and then just continue simulating with all these threshold values that can be calculated using this formula or maybe even other formula.
Thank you so much.
Does that answer your question, Mr.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Any other question?
Any other questions, folks?
Yes, this is Tim. I've got one question about the complexity of the logistics of putting a mob together. Is that a feature of your data?
The complexity of the logistics, I do not think so. We don't have that factor yet. I can show you the factors that we are going to actually work on. So we're going to look at ownership of the event, who own the location, for example, of the mob, the activity support, whether the activity is supported by some kind of entity, whether there is surveillance, whether the distance between the mobbers that are invited and the location of the event when it happened. We are looking at also, actually, yes, I see complexity, the complexity of the event itself, triability, and I also have an explanation for each one of these. So let me just look at the complexity very quickly. I don't have it here, but I think complexity will be one of these two. We haven't, see, the thing is, we just came up with this framework and we didn't start actually implementing it into the simulation. We're just looking, we are not now at the point where we say, these are the factors that are related to the event we should look at, but then estimating them, we don't know yet how many of these actually are possible to be estimated from the data we have. Does that make sense?
So, yes. Thanks.
Event complexity will be there, yes. And then also observability, like whether the event is observed or not, which could be estimated using maybe some kind of measure, whether maybe we can consider the physical mob versus non-physical, the cyber mob. So maybe we can say cyber mobs are not usually as observed by, let's say, law enforcement as much as the physical mob. Maybe that's not valid, but you know, the concept, right? So we haven't mapped these yet. So we know these concepts are important to the event coordination, but we are not at the point where we can actually, I can point out and say, oh, I can estimate this factor this way using this data set. We are still not there yet, but we're working toward that. Did that answer your question, Tim?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Something in the chat. Okay. Yes, thank you so much. Any other question?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Al-Khateeb.
Thank you guys for being here.
For being here.
Absolutely.
I think we're good to call it for today, and I hope we see you for the next meeting.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Have a good one. Thank you, guys. My pleasure.
Thank you, Samar. That was a great presentation. Thank you.
Welcome.